In September 2021, officers in Southfield, Michigan were dispatched to a house after a woman found a random dude asleep on the front porch. The caller was visiting her mother, but when she pulled up, she saw a total stranger passed out on her mom's chair. When the officers arrived at the scene, they found the dude completely asleep with his hands down his pants. The officer tried to talk to the sleeping dude while they were searching his pockets, but the guy had no idea what was going on. Everything was calm at first, but then one of the officers found a gun in his pants and they jumped into action to secure the weapon and put the dude in cuffs. Even after the cops yelled about the gun and started putting handcuffs on him, the dude barely woke up and obviously didn't feel like talking. Carrying a concealed weapon without a license is a felony in Michigan, but it turns out this guy was already a wanted criminal with a bunch of warrants. Nobody knows how he ended up on the front porch, but luckily the police got to him before he hurt himself or anyone else. Getting drunk on someone else's porch and falling asleep is a dumb move, but at least he didn't try to bite any officers like the woman in this next video. A highway patrol officer in New Mexico was responding to reports of a blue car swerving between lanes and speeding. He spotted the car and could see it going back and forth and hit his lights so the driver would stop. The car pulled over to the side of the road, but as soon as the officer hopped out of his truck, the blue car sped off down the highway. The officer decided not to chase them because he didn't want innocent people getting caught up in a dangerous chase. But then a little while later, the officer spotted the same blue car in a gas station parking lot. He went inside and asked the worker who was driving the blue car, and the cashier told the officer that they were in the bathroom. The police officer drew his gun and went to the bathroom, and the woman inside the stall said she was trying to pee. He wasn't going to wait to let her finish though and kicked in the stall door. The woman started screaming and said she didn't do anything wrong, but the officer put her in cuffs and took her outside. The woman was freaking out and begging the officer to let her go. Then another cop arrived at the scene, and the driver of the blue car told officers her name was Jamie Granger. Eventually she calmed down a little bit, and that's when the officers decided to give her a field sobriety test. Jamie wasn't doing good with the test though, and could barely follow the officers' directions. So instead of trying to fool them, Jamie just admitted straight up that she was drunk. She still claimed she didn't do anything wrong and started crying again when the officer put her cuffs back on. While the cops were searching her car and finding open liquor bottles, Jamie chilled out in the back of a police truck. For a minute, everything was cool, but then she started screaming at them to let her go again. The officer had put the cuffs on her in the front to be nice, but after she started acting crazy again, he decided to cuff her behind the back. He opened up the truck door, and that's when the situation really popped off. The officer tried to get Jamie out of the truck, but she screamed sexual assault at him and tried to bite his hand. He warned her that she was going to get another charge if she didn't calm down, but then Jamie kicked him in the chest and picked up a battery charge too. Eventually, the officers got her back in the truck and took her to the station, but the drama didn't end there. After they put Jamie in a holding cell, she started yelling again and kicked her shoes at the officers. Then when the officers left Jamie inside by herself, Jamie screamed like she was being murdered and fell to the floor. Officers decided to have paramedics come in and check her out, and that's when Jamie attacked another cop and kicked him in the knee. It's not clear how many charges she ended up catching, but Jamie turned a simple DUI into something way worse. The arresting officer probably didn't expect to get bitten by a crazy drunk woman when he started his shift that day. A cab driver named Ralph Valletta started out his shift like any other day, but what he didn't know is that his life was about to be put on the line. Ralph was sitting in traffic when an armed gunman hopped into the back seat and aimed a pistol right at his head. The robber told Ralph to hand over everything he had, but Ralph had just started his shift and only had a little bit of cash on him. Then the robber told Ralph to give him his phone and wallet if he didn't want to die. Ralph was listening to him and trying not to freak out, but luckily a patrol car was sitting right behind them and the officers inside realized that something was up. Ralph saw the police approaching and told the robber they were coming, and that's when the thief realized he messed up. The cops were on the robber before he even had a chance to try and run, and luckily the police were able to make the arrest without anyone getting hurt. The robber caught some bad luck when he tried to steal right in front of a cop. Staying calm in crazy situations is a skill that every cop needs, but the officer in this next video took it to a whole nother level. Oklahoma Highway Patrol Officer Brack Miller was tracking a suspect named Charles Carswell down the road. Getting into a chase is always dangerous, but most suspects don't start shooting at the cops chasing them. Carswell started letting off shots at Officer Miller from his car while driving, and a few of the bullets hit Officer Miller's front windshield just a few inches from his face. Officer Miller barely flinched though and stayed right on Carswell's tail while the bullets kept flying. Officer Miller tried to hit Carswell's SUV and stop him, but the first time it didn't go well and Officer Miller almost crashed. He got right back on Carswell a second later though. Carswell continued to shoot at the cop, but Officer Miller kept his cool and was able to stop Carswell the second time he tried the pit maneuver. After Officer Miller forced him to stop, Carswell hopped out of his SUV and grabbed a rifle from the back. Carswell then got into a standoff with the police for hours and shot at them a few different times, but eventually one of the officers hit him. Carswell could have surrendered right there and lived, but instead he dove for one of his guns, and that's when the police opened fire again and killed him. Carswell got caught after an alleged robbery. It's not clear how this next situation started, but bystanders were filming a woman walking down the street waving a pistol at everyone in the area. It looked like she might have just been trying to keep everyone away from her so she could escape, but a responding officer had other plans. Instead of getting into a shootout in the middle of a busy area, a cop rolled up and crashed right into the woman holding the gun. He didn't hit her hard enough to kill her, but it gave the other cops on the scene enough time to run up and arrest the crazy lady before she had the chance to start letting off shots. She never had a chance to run after taking a hit from a police cruiser, and the police had officially saved the day. On July 29, 2020, a Louisiana state trooper spotted a black Camaro speeding down Highway 17 near Winsboro and pulled it over. The officer could smell weed right away, but all the driver said was that his name was Michael, and there was a roach in the car, and that's why it smelled. At first, everything seemed pretty normal. Michael didn't have a license on him, but he said the car belonged to his brother and that he was headed home. But when the officer asked Michael where he lived, Michael couldn't give an answer. The officer knew something was up, but he had no idea how crazy the situation was about to get. It turns out that the driver's name was actually Mitchell, and his brother had nothing to do with owning the car. The police got in contact with the woman who actually owned the vehicle, and she told him that her son had been reported missing. The case was getting more complicated, and that's when the officer walked to the vehicle side of the Camaro and spotted 3 bullet holes in the side of the car. He had no idea what was going on and called for backup while he was trying to sort the situation out. They still didn't have much to book Mitchell for except speeding, but then everything changed. The officer decided to search the rest of the car, and that's when he popped the trunk and made the shocking discovery that a body was inside it. Everyone on the scene jumped into action and immediately put Mitchell in cuffs. While he was being arrested, Mitchell started crying and said, "I just hit him." The body in the trunk was a 23-year-old from Monroe, Louisiana named Michael Robinson, and it turns out everything started with an armed robbery that went left. When the police questioned Mitchell over the crime, he said his homie Cameron Poe planned the robbery and is the one who pulled the trigger on Michael. After he allegedly murdered him, Poe told Mitchell to go dump the body and the whip, and that's when the state trooper pulled him over for speeding. Later, Mitchell took the statement back though and said he was the only one involved. Poe's charges were dropped, but Mitchell's case is still pending. The state trooper who pulled Mitchell over got a murderer off the streets. In 2022, a dude named Antoine Sims called the police because he went to McDonald's and they gave him cold fries. And if you think that's crazy, wait until you find out what the officers discovered next. Not long after Antoine's call, an officer arrived on scene and started talking to Antoine outside about what happened with his fries. According to Antoine, he ordered the food with his fiance but wasn't given a receipt. Then when the order was called, they didn't know they were supposed to pick it up. So the food sat out for a few minutes and his fries got cold. After Antoine finished telling the officer about the situation, the cop went inside to talk to the McDonald's owner, who gave the officers a way different story. According to the owner, Antoine started yelling and cussing him out over the cold fries. So the owner told him he'd give him a refund and then he could leave. That's when Antoine allegedly threw a drink at the owner and stormed outside to call the cops. At first it seemed like just a dumb argument that got out of control, but the situation was about to get way more serious. When the officer went back to his car and ran Antoine's name in the police database, he found out that Antoine was actually wanted for murder and considered armed and dangerous. The officer kept it cool and went back to Antoine and said he needed to sign a document that would ban him from the McDonald's. But Antoine knew something was up. He started backing away from the cops, and when the officer stepped towards Antoine, he sprinted away as fast as he could. Antoine got away for a few minutes, but then someone called 911 and reported a dude trying to break into their apartment. The cops rushed to the scene, and that's when they spotted Antoine and chased him down. Antoine had been arrested in 2019 for the murder of a woman named Adalisa Muratovic. According to reports, Adalisa, her boyfriend Michael Smith, and another dude named Deshaun Flournoy went to Antoine's place for a drug deal, but they ended up trying to rob him and shots started going off. Adalisa was killed in the crossfire. Then Antoine allegedly took her body and her car to another town and set everything on fire. It's not clear where his case stands today, but there's a good chance he'd still be on the run if he didn't call the police over some cold McDonald's fries. On June 24th, 2023, an officer in Holman, Wisconsin spotted a motorcycle speeding down the street at night. He didn't get into a high-speed chase immediately though. Instead, the officer followed him from a safe distance and watched as the motorcycle pulled into a gas station. The officer ran his place while the man was inside, and that's when he discovered the motorcycle was registered to a 19-year-old named Isaac. Isaac wasn't just speeding though. He was driving on a permit that banned him from riding at night and without a helmet too. When Isaac hopped back on the bike, the officer tried to pull him over, but Isaac sped off at over 80 miles an hour. The chase didn't last long though. Isaac obviously didn't know where he was going because he ended up down a one-way road that ended in a bunch of grass. Isaac tried to drive through the grass, but the bike spun out of control and he had to run away on foot. Isaac got away for a couple of hours, but what he wasn't thinking about is the fact that the cops already had his motorcycle that was registered under his name. They were easily able to find his address, and later that night, they were at Isaac's front door. At first, Isaac tried to lie and said that he had been home for the last couple of hours, but eventually Isaac realized he wasn't going to get out of the situation that easily. He admitted to running from the cops and said he just didn't know what to do at the moment and panicked, but that excuse didn't keep him from getting arrested. So instead of just getting a ticket for violating his permit, Isaac went down for a felony charge of fleeing from an officer. Officers in Oklahoma responded to a call about a theft at a Tractor Supply store, but nobody expected what was about to happen. The cops tracked the suspects down and got into a high-speed chase all over town. The criminals were driving over 100 miles an hour and could have easily killed someone else on the road, so the cops knew they had to act fast before something bad happened. One of the officers got behind the suspect's vehicle and tried to hit them, but at first he couldn't get into the right position. The officer took a second shot at it though, and that's when he hit the car perfectly and sent them crashing into a wall. The pit move was almost effective, and another officer hopped out of his squad car to arrest the thieves. He ordered them to stop, but when they started driving away again, the officer took out his pistol and let off a shot into the whip. The suspect still got away and hid out in the woods, but eventually the cops caught up to them after they were identified by local reporters. A couple of traffic cops in Molina, Georgia pulled over a car for an illegal window tint, but what they didn't know is that the driver was actually the police chief in another local town. Police Chief Jonathan Hemphill hopped out of his car and started getting aggressive with the other officers immediately. He told one of them that their chief used to work for him, and Hemphill acted like they had no authority to pull him over. Apparently, before the video started, Hemphill had flashed his blue lights at the other cops, but the tags on his car weren't normal government plates, so the officers had no idea he was a cop too. Hemphill acted rude the whole time for no reason, even when the other officers explained the whole situation to him. Instead of talking it out and clearing everything up, Hemphill told the officers he was done with the situation and just sat in his car until they brought him his license back and let him go. The traffic cops made the right move in this situation, but the cops in this next video ended up in court after attacking an active duty Army lieutenant. In 2020, U.S. Army Lieutenant Corona Nazario was driving his brand new Chevy Tahoe down the street when a cop pulled up behind him and tried to make him pull over. Lieutenant Nazario didn't want to stop in the middle of a dark place, so he slowed down and pulled into a gas station down the road. That's when officers Daniel Crocker and Joseph Gutierrez hopped out of their patrol vehicle with their guns out and started aggressively screaming at Lieutenant Nazario to get out of his car. Nazario had no idea what was going on, and later he said he was afraid for his life. He didn't want to be hurt or killed by the aggressive cops, so he just kept his hands where they could be seen and asked officers what the problem was. Officer Gutierrez was getting more angry every second. He put his gun right in Nazario's face, then tried to grab his arms through the window of the Tahoe. Nazario stayed calm the whole time and even said he didn't want to get out because he was afraid. And that's when Officer Gutierrez told him, "You should be." Lieutenant Nazario told him over and over that he was an active duty member of the Army, but Gutierrez and Crocker obviously didn't care. And when Nazario wouldn't get out of the vehicle, Gutierrez pulled out his pepper spray and maced him in the face. Eventually, Lieutenant Nazario got out, and that's when Officer Gutierrez started kneeing him in the leg, and Crocker helped throw Nazario to the ground. When it was all over, Gutierrez ended up getting fired, and Lieutenant Nazario opened up a $1 million lawsuit against them. He won the case, but the judge only awarded Lieutenant Nazario around $4,000. Pepper spraying an Army lieutenant for no reason is crazy, but it's nothing compared to what happened in this next video. Not stopping at a flashing red light will usually just get you a ticket, but our next suspect decided to turn the situation into a wild high-speed chase. A female officer in Menomonee, Wisconsin saw a dude named Adam roll right through the red light and try to stop him, but instead, Adam took off and started speeding down residential streets to try to get away. After a few minutes, he pulled over and acted like he was going to stop, but as soon as the officer got out of her car, Adam drove off again. Other officers were already on the way for backup, and Adam ended up smashing directly into one of their cars while he was trying to get away. He flipped the cruiser onto its roof and ran into a pole, but he wasn't done yet. Adam hopped out of his car and tried to get away on foot, but the cops were way faster and took him down with a taser. So instead of ending the night with a simple ticket, Adam got hit with charges for reckless driving, felon to stop, criminal damage to property, hit and run involving injury, plus possession of marijuana. In September 2022, a woman was driving on a Florida highway around 6 in the morning when another car came up behind her without any lights on. Inside the other car was an 18-year-old named Brian Holmes, and his innocent victim had no idea what was about to happen. Brian hit her rear bumper, then started driving right next to her for a few minutes. It was already a scary situation, but then Brian aimed a pistol at her out of nowhere and let off 7 shots into her vehicle. Luckily, the woman wasn't hit, and it didn't take the police long to track Brian down. They found him outside of his house about 20 minutes later. Brian tried to get back in his car and drive off as soon as he spotted the cops, but the officers were too fast. A sheriff's deputy told Brian to get out of the car and asked him if he had a gun on him. Brian said no, but when the officers started searching him, a pistol fell out of his pants and hit the driveway. They immediately put Brian in handcuffs, and that's when the deputy told him exactly how he felt. The officer called Brian a freaking idiot right to his face, then went and picked up the gun off the ground. Brian was hit with charges for aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, discharging a firearm from a vehicle, shooting into an occupied vehicle, and possession of a concealed weapon using the commission of a felony by a person under 24. Devontae Bradley ran from the cops and almost got away, but then he accidentally answered the door and was face to face with the exact officer who was chasing him. It all started with a routine traffic stop after an officer noticed a vehicle on the highway with expired registration. Everything was fine at first, and the driver had his mom on the phone trying to explain the situation to the officer. When the driver was asked for his ID, he told the officer he didn't have it, and that's when the officer went around to the driver's side of the vehicle and tried to get him to come out. The criminal had other ideas though, and he slammed the car and drove and sped off. The officer was just a few inches away from the car and almost got his feet ran over, but luckily he got out of the way and ran straight back to his patrol car to call for backup. The driver was identified as Devontae Bradley, but the cops didn't chase him down and risk other people getting hurt in a high-speed chase. Later that same day, the officer who stopped him earlier spotted Devontae's car in the parking lot of a local Home Depot and discovered that he had been making calls from a nearby hotel with his friend. The cops were able to track down the original owner of the car Devontae was driving, but they said they didn't really know Devontae or have his contact info. Weeks went by with no breaks in the case, but then the situation took a shocking turn. The officer who pulled Devontae over went to the home of the vehicle owner to talk with them, and he never expected what happened when he knocked on the door. Devontae Bradley was the one who opened the door, and the officer immediately recognized him as the dude who almost ran him over. He tried to get in the apartment, but Devontae slammed the door in his face and locked it. The officer called for backup and they surrounded the building, which meant Devontae had nowhere to run this time. He came out of the apartment and started talking to the cops from across the hallway, but at first they had no idea what he was gonna do. Devontae was on a run and already proved how badly he didn't want to get caught, and the officers didn't know if he was armed with a weapon or not. The situation could have easily turned deadly, but luckily the officers kept it cool and were able to convince Devontae to surrender without any issues. Devontae got hit with 2 felony charges of eluding an officer and jumping bail. He has a few other open cases going on at the same time, but now that he's in custody, the cops don't have to worry about him running away again. Devontae probably won't be free for a long time, but this next video shows a sergeant stepping in to free a suspect when another officer tries to make a bad arrest. On July 4th, 2019, a YouTuber named Christopher Peterset was walking down the sidewalk and filming a nursing home in Illinois. He wasn't doing anything illegal, but someone inside the nursing home was worried about the situation and called the police. When an officer arrived at the scene, she tried to tell Christopher to stop so she could talk to him. Christopher was just going to walk away because he didn't think he did anything wrong, but then the officer grabbed his arm and ordered him to stop. Christopher said she didn't have any reason to stop him, but the officer told him she was going to book him for disorderly conduct and call for backup. That's when a sergeant came to the scene to help out. Christopher didn't want to talk to him either. The sergeant didn't have a lot of info to go off of, so when he pulled up to assist the other officer, he thought Christopher had actually broken the law. But while the other cop was filling out the paperwork for the disorderly conduct arrest, the sergeant kept talking to Christopher and got his side of the story. Filming on a sidewalk is completely legal, and when Christopher finally explained what he was doing, the sergeant realized the other officer had made a big mistake. The sergeant confronted the officer over the situation, and she tried to say that the people who worked in the nursing home were disturbed by what Christopher was doing, and that's why she was arresting him. The sergeant knew that excuse wasn't going to hold up in court though, so he took the cuffs off of Christopher and let him walk free. Filming a nursing home might be weird, but what happens in this next video was way crazier. In 2023, a highway cop in Wisconsin clocked an 18-year-old dude named Zavarian going over 90 miles per hour in the 65 zone. The officer started chasing him immediately and turned his lights on, but instead of pulling over and taking a ticket, Zavarian started driving like he was playing Grand Theft Auto and even drove through a median towards oncoming traffic. Getting into a high-speed chase can put a lot of people's lives at risk, so the chase was called off while the officers followed Zavarian from a further distance. But even though the cops pulled back, Zavarian kept driving crazy and people were calling 911 to report him. Then another police department spotted Zavarian and started chasing him again. He sped down the highway for a while, but then he tried to drive through a field and ended up getting his car stuck not even 150 yards from the road. The cops saw him running through the field towards a house, and that's when they all pulled up and brought out the K-9 unit. It was a sketchy situation because they didn't know if Zavarian was armed or not, but luckily the K-9 found him immediately and they were able to cuff Zavarian without any drama. After they put him in the back of a squad car, Zavarian told police that the only reason he ran was because he didn't have his license and was wearing an ankle monitor. If Severian had just pulled over when the first officer caught him speeding, he would have gotten away with just paying a $200 ticket. But instead he tried to do the race and ended up getting hit with a bunch of felony charges for recklessly endangering safety, eluding an officer, and bail jumping. Severian caught felony charges by driving like a madman.